I think when I first reached out to you, I told you, I said, look, the elephants take precedence. Like, you just,
I'm
I
telling you.
don't know of anybody who is, you're literally involved in, dare I say, chasing elephants daily.
Yeah, this is the issue, and the end of the dry season is not making it any easier, and we've had some failed short rains, so there's a little bit of desperation out there. But the last few days it's been raining a bit, so yeah, um, yeah, never ending, man, never ending battle. So yeah, thanks for the opportunity to chat to you, man, and you're doing good work yourself, I see.
Man, we're trying. We're trying. We're all trying, right? We all are just dealing with what we can. We've got limited amount of hours in the day. We wish we all had 30 hours in a day versus 24. And
Yeah.
we are slowly plodding forward. I was actually having a very amicable social media discussion with somebody who sees us and they see, oh, you guys convey the truth about sustainable use of wildlife, or if you want to be more frank, sustainable use of hunting.
Yeah.
And of course, you're going to be biased, Robbie. And I said, I don't think we're biased. I think we just tell the truth, and if the truth means we shouldn't be hunting, we're going to say it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's all tied to this Florida black bear hunt that's happening right now, and obviously bears being as cute as elephants
Yeah.
stirs emotions in people.
Yeah.
And the guy that I was having this discussion with was like, well, how do we know it's not going to go the way of 2015 and the abysmal hunt that it was? And I said, yeah, you're right. It was a dismal failure in 2015. It was terrible. And I think that he responded back going, "Oh man, I didn't think that you would admit that it was a failure." I said, "Of
Like
course it
someone
was a
that's
failure. It
reasonable to
sucked."
talk to, and not just like yeah,
Yeah,
and
we're
talking about
reasonable.
facts and yeah.
Exactly, exactly. Well, Carel Verhoef, welcome to the Origins Foundation podcast. I'm super excited to have you. I know we've tried this a couple of times, and the elephants have won a couple of times, but today they didn't win.
Yeah, it was a close call, but I'm happy to be here, Robbie, and thanks for your time and allowing me on the show. So yeah, man, fire away. We're busy, and this time of year, as you know, elephants never stop, but it's not only isolated to elephants, there are some, yeah, bigger picture things always in the conservation world, it's the long game, as you know, and it's that type of thinking that I think we all need a little bit in our lives, just
Yeah,
scientific,
100%.
factual information that's based on longer term goals and a little bit, yeah.
So today you said you nearly didn't make it today. You sent me an email. It was 4:38 in the morning here, and you're like, I'm maybe 10 minutes late. And I was like, oh, here we go again. But
Mm.
that's okay. You made it. What was going on now that you nearly didn't make it?
Yeah, we just had an incident of an injury actually, of a Maasai herdsman that got injured last night. Uh, he was taking his cattle to water, unfortunately too late in the evening already, which he shouldn't do, and he got tossed around a little bit by an elephant. Luckily, he survived, was not too much damage. He actually landed in his herd of cattle, which probably saved him, and the elephant couldn't find him again, and then
Wow.
dispersed. But this is competition for water, and it's competition for at this time of day. The primary driver is water for elephants and cattle, and elephants and cattle actually use the same path. So from A to B, the shortest way you will obviously find elephant and know the most comfortable and easier routes from water source to water source, and cattle herders absolutely follow the same path because it just makes sense. But yeah, interesting. But here I am, so he's okay.
Why
And
did you say it was too late? Why did you say that he went to the water too late?
it was already dark. It was already after dark. So he took his cattle to drink at 7 p.m. last night, which is probably about maybe an hour and a half or 2 hours too late, which he knows. It's far better for his cattle to drink and while the sun is still shining. And we also know, and he also knows that elephant having not had access to this only water point in the area that's currently available, they are already thirsty towards the end of the afternoon, so they come in early evening already to
Yeah,
quench.
you're making an observation that we saw when we went and filmed in the photographic zone of Indumet, right on the border of Tanzania and Kenya,
Oh
and
yeah,
there was one source of water out there. It
yeah.
was this pit. That there was this long like runway down to this thing, and the cattle obviously used it, and the elephants obviously used it. Um, yeah, you can imagine the competition for water is serious.
Yeah, interesting that you mentioned Endumet, but we just signed the elephant management contract there. And as you know, Endumet is an extension of Amboseli a little bit, and it's also a corridor that connects kind of the Kenyan elephants a little bit with Ngorongoro, which is another area that we are working. So Endumet is becoming an area of operation for us, but for the first time, we're going to dabble a little bit into managing lions and carnivore conflict with cattle, and we want to see if we can have a nighttime impact on protecting Maasai cattle while they're
Oh,
in their
amazing.
bomas, just to see if 2 drones could possibly do the trick there. And then obviously we are working on the forest edges of Kilimanjaro, which is the actual national park, and Endumet is the buffer zone. Um, and there's some commercial farming around the slopes of Kilimanjaro that we need to manage, and then while we're doing that, we're helping with a bit of connectivity towards the interior of Tanzania, just to help some elephants
Yeah,
through
yeah, yeah.
across busy roads and things like that. So an
Well,
interesting area,
well, Carl, introduce yourself. We've jumped into the
yeah. Yeah,
conversation without
interesting.
even introducing yourself. Who do you work for? What do you do?
Um, Shucks, it's a long story, but in
Well, it's
short,
a
I
good thing
was
we're on a
kind of
podcast. We're
yeah, I know,
a long
yeah,
form
but
content capture.
exactly. We don't have to do everything in 5 seconds like the requirement these days. But I was born into kind of grew up in Kruger National Park where my father worked for sand parks his whole life.
Where in
Um,
Kruger did you work? Where did you grow up?
Skukuza, so in that little town, which is
When
kind
were
of
you
the
there?
I was born in 1977, so I was there
Okay.
from then
When did you
until
leave? Let me ask me that. When did you leave Kruger?
the late 80s.
Okay.
My dad went to headquarters in Pretoria for.
Okay. Okay.
So I spent a little bit of my last of my high school in the city, big city, and then did some time in the military in the South African Navy, and then came up to Tanzania straight after that because one of my dad's early duties was to go and put up this film every Sunday evening. There was like an amphitheater in the Skukuza rest camp, and as a junior at the time, my dad had to go and put that film on for tourists to go and watch every Sunday. I think it was at 7 p.m. or something like that, which was quite late for a little kid. But every Sunday, then obviously I watched it, and it was this Serengeti movie
Amazing.
over and over and over again. But later in my dad's career, he started struggling with elephants and conflict, just in rest camps and things like that. And then obviously one of his projects was to drop the fences into Mozambique, to create more space for elephants in Kruger. And I think there's currently again an elephant problem in Kruger National Park with just too many elephants there for the
Hmm.
vegetation to sustain. So it's the same problems, and that brought us to conversations about open ecosystems and areas without fences. And that elephant work brought in people like Ian Douglas Hamilton that just passed away now, and he worked up here in East Africa, and there were conversations about elephants needing space to breathe and seasonal movements and baobab trees, and it's actually quite interesting, an indicator of seasonal movement is when baobab trees would survive the dry season. And in Tanzania and in East Africa, we have no damage or loss of baobab trees just because there's space for seasonal movement. So it's actually so simple when you look at it, and a part of the Tanzanian conservation model is based on open ecosystems that are then got buffer zones around them, and those are controlled by and protected by hunting, and problem animals are then absorbed in those buffer zones, and then that allows for abundance, and that's why we have the great migration and things like that. But yeah, in a nutshell, I didn't really have a choice to come up here, but I started obviously in the commercial end of tourism, as we would say, but just seeing how poor my dad has always been as a true conservationist. So I entered into the guiding career in my early 20s, and then slowly, always had a research project. First of all, with lion numbers in the Serengeti. There were these super prides of over 50 lions in the Serengeti, and wanted to figure out what was going on there. So then I had small little research camps in the Serengeti that I based myself from.
And you're
then
just working independently as a researcher at this point?
Yeah, exactly. But dabbling in the safari world,
Okay.
trying to earn dollars and pay the bills and things.
Sure.
And it was great. But the base has always been research and knowledge and what's going on. And to the extent that it's an interesting story, but in 2005, I believe, which is, what is that now, 20 years ago, the northern Serengeti, like we know now, the Mara River crossings on the Serengeti side wasn't even known at the time. And I was doing some work on research work on those massive lion prides just in the northeastern corner of the Serengeti, or the Lobo Valley, and that's where those huge lion prides all the way to the Sand River and the Bologonja Spring. That's where those really big prides of lions were, and that was literally 50 kilometers from the Mara River. But no one ever went there. And as you do night after night, you sit around a fire and you start talking about, you see it on the map, but why can't we go? And a good friend of mine, or my right-hand man really, Machine, because he's a mechanic and now a guide and a very good businessman. I had to convince him to let's go 10 kilometers at a time. I convinced him, and then we start driving north. We just go northwest towards the Mara River, and we see some poaching and people running around, and that's when we kind of lost our courage and then turned back, because there was no mobile, there was no, even with radios, there was no one to talk to. We were too far from everyone. And there was this famous Tanzanian poacher that got some arms from Uganda or Central African Republic at the time. And he was running that corner of the Serengeti a little bit as his own country. I find out like later on, and this is early 2000s, so it's not even that long ago.
Yeah.
And then slowly we crept closer. It takes another week to convince Machine that, maybe let's just go again. And then there were obviously no real roads at the time, and eventually we got to the Mara River, maybe a couple of months in, and it was in the beginning quite depressing. Everything was snared, and there was a lot of how it is when you arrive in an area that's been actively used as a poaching field. I remember a lion.
Are we in the national park at this point?
In the national park, you're right on the banks of the Mara, as we know now. There where you saw those pictures being taken of all those people that got out of there, literally there.
Right. Okay.
So in 2005, I was like camping there all on my own. There was a ranger post that was almost fortified with 12-foot walls, banged on the door, no one, absolutely no one. So for months we just had these areas that in the beginning was depressing because it was just putting animals out of their misery. And there was, I still remember the first lion that I saw there was foaming in the mouth, and he had his bottom canines, literally he had to work it through a snare. So it was clean cut off.
Jeez.
Anyway, so those types of scenes, and we just decided that, how can we stabilize this? How can we actually? Then I saw these river crossings. My first week there was literally in the bank of the Mara River, and I was just sitting there for those days. The crossings just kept on going and going and going for hours because there was just nothing stopping it. Anyway, so then drove back to the warden and just showed him these pictures and said, like, I mean, this is just what's going on here. And then he told me the story about, no, it's actually really dangerous to kind of go there. But without drifting off too far, the underlying purpose of what we have done is always to stabilize areas and always to bring in a certain amount of tourism so that there's value. And when we talk about value, which is a conversation also in the bigger scheme of things, is value has to come from somewhere. It doesn't just fall out of the sky. And even if a place is beautiful, even if it's the Serengeti, if you don't have stability and if you don't have an income that's being generated from an area, then there's no reason for people or the government or the people in the area to look after the resources there, and it's just simple maths. And I'm using this Northern Serengeti as an example because this is something that we all know, and it's regarded as a high volume, a high tourism density area, but as 20 years ago there were areas in the Serengeti where even tourism wasn't really viable. But through feet and creating this value, it's stabilized and it generates money now. And it's important that areas generate money because otherwise there's no reason to protect it. And then governments generally start looking for other sources, whether it's mining or, what's underneath, because idle land, the days of land just lying open for not generating anything for anyone, those days are absolutely over. It has to have value. And it's not just value, one-sided value. Any piece of land needs to have value for the government, first of all, whether it's park fees or trophy fees or some sort of income that is generated to create enough reason to put in resources and roads and then big infrastructure things. And then there must be value for the people around this kind of area, whether it's a bit of job creation or whether it's protein or whether it's something. It has to have value.
Of course.
And then obviously kind of the private sector needs to be rewarded for risk and putting in beds for people to stay and visit, because without that there is none of the other beneficiaries anyway. So that is kind of the principle of conservation, generally speaking, when you're looking at non-mainstream areas. And without that, someone creating that, it just doesn't happen. And that goes for any kind of area in sub-Saharan Africa. It doesn't matter. And then you look at like what's viable. What things are viable. What's the access in an area. Can people get there? What is the cost of getting there? What am I competing with? Are they tsetse fly? What's the weather like? Is it possible to have mainstream tourism there? Is it possible to have people with mobile phones coming to take pictures? Or will the Serengeti pull that type of clientele? You can't just duplicate things and assume that if they work here, that they will work everywhere. And there's sometimes there's a huge misperception of logistics and the bearability. Is it bearable to be in an area as simple as
does somebody even want to go there, right? That's the thing. Like,
it just doesn't allow it, or tsetse fly just doesn't allow it. You're not going to have the same type of person as a first-time visitor to Africa going to the middle of nowhere in an area that has tsetse fly all the way around, and where you absolutely drive for weeks and only see planes going by. Is that Serengeti model viable there? Yes or no?
No.
And it's that kind of misperception of what it's really like out there and the space, that we're talking about. If you look at Tanzania, which is only one country in East Africa, round numbers, 1 million square kilometers, generally speaking, of which 25% is protected, and so that's 250,000 square kilometers. And miles, I don't know what that would be, but it's It's big space, and if you then look at a proportion of how much of that is protected by core national park type areas, and then it's like a third of it, and then there's
Yeah.
still two-thirds that is open areas,
Mm.
open areas where habitat protection is still taking place, but there are different models, of looking after what I think everyone can understand should be habitat, first of all.
Yeah, I think that should be the most fundamental thing that everyone considers, right? If
Yeah.
we've got a burgeoning human population that's pressing on all of these wonderful wild areas,
Yeah.
and the number one thing to keep wildlife around for our kids and our grandkids one day is habitat. End of story. And we've only
Absolutely.
got limited tools in our toolbox to protect habitat. One of which
Yes.
is hunting, one of
Yeah.
which is ecotourism, one of which is forestry.
Mm.
Why would you, even in whatever theology that you have, want to get rid of one of the only half dozen tools that we have in the toolbox?
Yeah, so this brings us to all these kind of questions, and it's actually a good conversation to have because I've always been an inside national park person. This is where I grew up, and I can't change that. Yeah, so it's I've I am not personally a hunter myself, although I shoot for the pot, and I if I'm hungry, I have no
Well,
problem.
then you're a hunter. If
Then
you
I'm a
shoot for the
hunter,
putt,
and
you're a hunter.
yeah, but interesting. Even though my father worked for the National Parks Board in South Africa, part of his salary was to hunt impala each month, just because shops were so far. That was part of your salary.
Yeah, yeah.
So, we have to be realistic about if you are happy to eat a cow or anything else, you must be happy to eat a chicken. And if you're happy to eat a chicken, then we can also talk about a buffalo, or an eland, which is very much similar to each other. And while game meat is actually requires less uh, looking after, and dipping and medicine and things like that. And eland do wonderfully well on on good land, and so I grew up on buffalo meat. Buffalo meat was sold inside
In Kruger.
in Kruger, and
Yeah.
same beef, and because those days we were still culling buffalo and elephant, which obviously the reason why there's such a big problem with elephant is because those practices are now not ethically allowed
Mm-hmm.
anymore. But
Mm-hmm.
we are paying the price in habitat and in
Mm-hmm.
vegetation, so we're having the same issues just literally as 50 years later. The same things we are talking about now was discussed when I was a kid and I just listened about a culling that's been forced to stop and how now to manage the overpopulation of elephants in Kruger. So it's just going around in circles as you can see, because there's just such a big misunderstanding about the size and the space requirement for these large mammals and herbivores, and that it's not like practically to just hand them around to each other and say, here's an elephant, please look after it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's just not possible, or have 1,000 buffalo, we, I mean, just as sandparks, with regression to other areas, but obviously everything possible was done to try and find solutions for an overpopulation of elephants. There were relocations, there were little ones were kind of put in Burmas, and they were sent to Pilansberg, and all those elephant problems and cars being turned
Yep.
over. There were
Yep.
elephants sent to
Yep.
Angola.
The
They were
rhino rapings of the early
absolutely.
1990s.
So absolutely everything was kind of tried. There's no one that wakes up in the morning going like, I want to go cull 30 a whole herd of not if you work in the conservation world. It's not
Mm-hmm.
fun. It's not something that's pleasant. It's not a person. It's not a we so there's no one that's going to just wake up one morning and say, okay, let's go, as an option. And similarly, I think with any kind of vulnerable area or area that needs protection, it becomes more about what's practically possible and what pays the bills and what options there are, um, and and then what has the best return for the amount of impact, you know. how many roads or bridges or lodges do we have to build in the middle of nowhere to sustain kind of a certain model? And so if we look at the same numbers, that 250,000 square kilometers that we're talking about, which is now currently being conserved by hunting. So every national park in Tanzania has a buffer zone of hunting around it. And then
Yep.
obviously you used to have the Selous, which half of it, or maybe a third of now, is still being looked after by hunting. But it's a substantial amount of land, and it's also land that no one else really wants. So people think that hunters go to prime areas and then they go to... No,
It's almost the opposite. They get given the shit areas, and
yeah.
then those shit areas
And then
become
you go
prime
there.
areas. They become prime areas because of the protection, and then it's like, oh, thank you so much. We'll take that back now.
Yeah, exactly. So I start any of these emotional arguments that we all kind of get dragged into online from time to time, and it always turns out about someone thinking that there are other options, and that the hunter is stopping the tourism lodge from developing and blocking them and things like that. No, anyone is welcome, I always start those arguments with any tourism. I'm a photographic tourism owner. I push camps into areas. I know how hard it is to create a new market in the middle of nowhere. And so we welcome any given day. If you want to buy a hunting block, just bring your money and you can build the lodge. It's there. I think at the moment we
Come
have
take it. Come put your
40
money where
blocks
your mouth
open.
is.
40 blocks. So any tourism photographic guy that would like to come and take on one of these areas, you are more than welcome. But we don't, in reality, it's not a viable model. And I think once you get to the crux of, let's put the money down, build your lodge, and put the vehicles down, and do the marketing, put in the airstrip, try and get the scheduled flights, get the critical mass, and people will just realize that it's not not if you're competing with the Serengeti and the Masai Mara, where you see 100 different lions in a day. Literally, in the Serengeti, you could on one day, just randomly driving around, see 100 different lions, probably 5, 6 different sightings.
Jeez.
Then you have
Jeez.
the migration and a few leopards and great beautiful plains, and almost the perfect scenario. And then you want to compete with something on the Mozambican border with a 6-month season or a 4-month season that you can operate there, and you're trying to duplicate the same kind of model, and it's just not realistic. And then I always go like, but
Yeah.
what
Carl,
happened 200
what
years?
is what?
What happened 200 years ago?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Carl, so you're working in the photographic sector, but what I know you for are these amazing elephant drone videos that I see literally daily on LinkedIn. Is that a side hustle for you? Is that
Yeah,
like
so I got
okay,
dragged.
this is my
Yeah, I got dragged back
conservation
into the
implementation
elephant
arm of
conflict
who I
world
am?
by a
What is
friend of
that?
mine. Yeah, sorry, man. I think we just had a glitch there in the
No,
in the
no. I was
start.
saying, like, tell me a little bit about that business. It's almost as like you online you hide your photographic guide side of you, and this is like this is what I do. Like I chase elephants with thermal drones.
Yeah. So this is an interesting story, and I'm glad we have a little bit of time. But I was, I do a lot of training in the photographic world, and we training guides and things like this. And we've always tried to push tourism into marginalized parks. And one of these little parks, right on the Kenyan border in northeastern Tanzania, is a little national park called Mkomazi National Park.
Yeah,
It
I
used to
know
be.
Nkomazi
You
well.
know Mkumazi, but it used to be a game reserve. It used to be like a management area. It didn't ever have a national park status, and it was at the brink of being lost to us forever. But it also includes the Eastern Arc Mountains, which is the Galapagos of kind of Africa. It's endemic species and a whole lot of things. And I was literally just doing guide training there 2 years ago or 2.5 years ago. And the warden at the time, we were in the lecture room and there was like a commotion going on at the back. And I invited the warden because he was a friend of mine. And we worked on projects to kind of market the park and get a trickle of tourism in. And I specifically did guide training there so that guides can take customers there. And he came to me and he said, good to see you again. And he spoke to the students and he did all this thing, and I could just see the man is under an enormous amount of stress. And afterwards I pulled him aside and he told me, no, I'm just about to get fired. And I asked him, why? You're a good warden. And he says, no, it's political pressure from politicians in the area, because elephants are just out of control. Elephants are outside the park. They're not inside the park, and now it's becoming his problem, because this is not a performance internal parks board issue. This is, high-ranking politicians that will lose their jobs, political jobs, if they can't protect humans from elephants.
Yep.
I then told him, sorry to hear, man, life is hard, and let me think if we can figure something out. And while we were doing a few years earlier, also in Umkomazi, we did a filming project to market the park. And at the time, we had a drone pilot, and he took this, started filming wildlife, which we thought we didn't want this unnatural movement of animals. We tried to get the scenic shots, and he tried to film an elephant. And while he did that, the elephant obviously shook his head and like stormed off into a distance. And it was interesting. I told him, listen, we're not going to use that shot. But in the back of my mind, I realized that the elephant had a very strong reaction to the drone. But this is also a long time ago, like in 2015 or something like that.
Okay.
And I then looked at drones, and we looked at scenarios, and most of the conflict happens at night, and there were no drones at the time that could do the job at night. And I parked the idea, and I said it wasn't going to work. But we kept an eye on the developments of drone technology and things like that, and we realized at a point that the moment a drone costs would become less than about $10,000, I figured it maybe becomes viable to give it a go. And this was the same time that happened, that he had these issues, and we were just running training and full-on safaris in the Serengeti. And I told him, Emmanuel, the warden, I said, fine, let's try, but I'm not going to write any letters. You deal with the Parks Board. If you get a pilot project approved, I will bring resources. I will bring a camp, and I will give it a proper go to see if it works, but only for a month. This was the amount of time that I could allocate to this type of endeavor at the time. And I kind of left it. And then it's 2 years ago now or so, but in the middle of peak season, Emmanuel phones me and he says he got it approved. And I said, Emmanuel, all my camps are full. I can't. He says, we only have August. And then I had to go to my wife and I had to say, listen, I need to pull a camp now from the Mara River. And she just looked at me and she said, is it for elephants? And I said, unfortunately, but it's also for a friend, to see if we can help him. We made a logistic arrangements, but I pulled a camp out, and at the time we just rented a drone, still the thermal drone. I was still negotiating with guys, and I said, okay, let's rent it. $1,500. You put $1,500 in. We couldn't even fly drones at the time. But off we went, and I said, we're going to give it a go. I took one of my chefs, Chef Alex. He's now actually a director in one of our food businesses. I took him with me, and I said, come, we're going to go and see what we can do. We arrived, I went to the warden, and I said, where do we go? And now, 2 years down the line, I look at this area. He literally sent us into a war zone of elephants. And I still remember we launched this drone on the edge of the park, but in a farming area, which is a town called Karamba, and it had good irrigation. It had a dam, because when that park was declared, they had to relocate people out of the park. And in that relocation process, they built a dam. And this is still today one of the only permanent water sources. But this dam is used for irrigation, and there's dry season farming. Now imagine the
Oh,
Umkomazi
what an attraction.
Tsavo landscape, and then
The
you
ice
have
cream in the landscape for the elephants.
and then you have people pumping and irrigating, and we got sent there with my little drone, and we flew the first night, and I just flew over this town and the irrigation canal on our right hand side, and it was just unbelievable, and it was
Unbelievable, like you just saw lots of elephants.
yeah, lots of elephants, but not just that, but it was almost like a war zone. So people were getting ready, people were protecting their farms with their lives, and it's still like that today. Fires were being made, people were drinking cognac to get courage. We talk about Dutch courage, this is where, true meaning of it. Dogs were getting, all psyched up to fight the battle in the evening so that our harvest can be secured, and so that life can go on. And it was interesting because this burden was put on the younger generation. People that are still fit and strong, obviously, were kind of handed over responsibility for the greater community to be able to secure a harvest, So, but one of the first, and we edited badly edited a little 5-minute clip, of this kind of type of scenario. And one of the guys, it was just absolute. These slings that you also perhaps saw, where guys,
That's
so out of
amazing.
that
That's
fire,
like that's the coolest video. Is that you've got these guys running because
yeah,
it's a thermal drone. It looks like the
yeah,
1800s, right? It's like a fireball around their head that they're swinging to try and like either
yeah.
throw at the elephant or just like dissuade him.
Yeah, exactly. So we stepped into this world, probably at the time underprepared, and trying things that's never been tried before, hoping that it would work, to try and save a good warden's job, and since that day we were never able to leave, just because
But it worked. That
it
night you
worked.
must have
Luckily,
seen
it
something
worked.
that you were like, "Whoa, this actually works."
Yeah, it worked, and it didn't. It worked 95% fairly easily, because all breeding herds are kind of very protective of their little ones. So the biggest killers within a community would be the breeding herds, because if you use a shock measure to chase elephants, they generally run too fast for the little ones to keep up, and then there's a separation, and then all of a sudden the matriarch turns around, or the mother turns around, and she's missing a little calf, and then she immediately turns back to go and look for it, and then she finds a farmer. So 90% of deaths are probably killed done by breeding herds, and breeding herd management with drones it's not even hard. You can do it from 100 meters. The moment it's not even high risk flying that is required, So, and that already negates kind of 90% of deaths. Very easy to control them. And then you left with the bulls, and 90% of the bulls are very easy to work with drones, and then you always remaining with like 1% of the population that are stubborn. Who knows? Maybe the bull is deaf, I mean, I didn't test his ears, or what is the scenario, or habituated, or really addicted to the sugars and the things out there, or just kind of, and those ones are the ones that we spend most of our time with now. The world of human-elephant conflict is unfortunately very unforgiving, because your success rate is measured by whether people can harvest or not. It's not about you were successful 99 out of 100 times. It's just whether people were able to harvest, which is kind of unforgiving, because you could be successful really a lot of the times, but if the guy doesn't get his harvest, it doesn't matter, So we realized that you have to be 100% successful, and that is the issue with 90% of other measures that are being used, whether they're passive measures or chili fences or BI fences or whichever other way. If you're still only 95% successful, you still fail, because the bottom line is the farmer couldn't harvest, and
Yeah.
if you lose your crop towards the end of the harvest, you've already spent the money on pumping water, you've already spent time on labor, and you've still lost your harvest. Now the knock-on effect is not just you've lost your harvest, you now have to redo something to feed your family. Um, so you're spending double the amount of energy and labor to get back to just subsistence living. Where if you've had that harvest, you now have security, food security, and you can spend the other half of the year doing something else. So your growth within your security and your family is exponential. So much revolves around being able to get that harvest.
So 10 years ago, you had this test flight in this war zone. 10 years on now, how big are you now? Like, how many drones do you have?
So
how
this
many
was
teams do you
not
have?
10 years ago, this was 2 years ago. So
Okay.
thermal drones only became an option over the shelf like we are now with DJI 2 years ago
Okay.
with the T's being added
Yeah.
to the drone world. So the moment those drones, or luckily for the warden, as he was about to get demoted, we were able to kind of get our hands on a thermal drone. But we have been operating in that area where we've started now for 2 years. So we have 2 years of data, we have 2 years of stats, and because that's all what it's about, really. It's not about whether I think we are successful, it's whether the data shows that it's better than static or passive measures, and this certainly is the case. In our area of operations, which is now just around the western border of Umkomazi, is a 200-kilometer stretch. So there's no one that can operate on our scale.
How many drones are you flying to cover 200 kilometers?
So we're flying 4 drones. So you're looking pretty much at about 25 kilometers active area, and then with a little bit of traveling, you double that. So you can probably look at around 50 kilometers that you can manage with a drone.
Okay.
If you allow mobility, and that's the other aspect. So it's not just drones, but it's also being able to have a mobile camp that can support that drone and still shift with seasonal movements. So just within that operational area of 50 kilometers, you still have seasonal
Absolutely
fluctuations and different crops, different drivers, primary drivers and secondary drivers that happen seasonally in those areas. And 2 years down the line, we are far more now in tune with what's happening when and what the drivers are and which water sources are drying up in what sequence. And then combined with that, we also work with a national park and planning a water network inside the park. So the more elephants we can keep in the park,
exactly.
the less we have to deal with outside the park. So we are now strategically working on a water network that unfortunately has to be artificial. So we're getting back to artificial water. So we're getting back
But it's still an open system.
Still an open system, but we have to consider that the catchment area of the rivers, which is now the Pare Mountains and the Usambara Mountains, are so inhabited by people. You have 300,000 people living in the mountains.
Wow.
So and then you have rice farming in between the mountain and the park. So there is no more water going into the park. So we will have to supplement at some point. Otherwise, the elephants just go into the mountains and where the water is anyway, and that brings us to the current scenario where you have more elephants outside the park than in. So those are kind of the long term, and we just finished drilling a borehole on a very strong migratory route that's coming out of Tsavo through Umkomazi. So 2 boreholes on that migratory path. Then there's one on the park border. Then they get to one of the first of our observation points. So it's very much more than just chasing elephants. It's a lot to do about planning it and what is the longer term plans. And then a huge amount of work is going into corridor integrity. Which corridors are still viable, which ones are not viable anymore. That's literally just.
I think that's the coolest part of what I've learned about elephants in Tanzania. I saw some data from some collaring efforts done by Tawiri, and the corridors between, say, Arusha and the Endemit system, and Arusha and Tarangire and the
Yeah.
Endemit system, and then I think the coolest corridors were west of Endemit, up out across into Natron, and then north up into Kenya. They were just very distinctive, just like foop, foop, foop. It was so cool to see.
Yeah, so this brings us now to what value does hunting bring to open systems and core area integrity, and then what value does it bring with regards to connectivity? Um, so when we look at elephants, connectivity is probably as important as habitat. Just if you consider that we have, let's say, 30,000 elephants in the Amboseli Tsavo ecosystem, and we have another 60,000 elephants in Tanzania. And then if you consider the Niassa Tunduru corridors, that's the connectivity from that we have with East African elephants that can connect to Southern African elephants. So if we don't have that connectivity, we will slowly develop an East African elephant subspecies and a Southern African elephant subspecies, which I'm sure everyone would agree we don't want to create.
Mm-hmm.
So these corridors of the connectivity is super important so that we can have the Amboseli Tsavo elephants still mixed with the Tarangire, Ngorongoro, Ruwa, Sudu, Niassa elephants, and then to those ones further south. At least the genes need to stay connected.
And a lot of those corridors are these GMAs that nobody wants except the hunters.
Exactly, because those are difficult areas to, one, manage. They're marginalized. People are marginalized in those areas, and it's just generally not areas that are suitable for commercial farming. Otherwise, farming would have happened there already. So there are no clear economic kind of model that works. And these are also then areas that are used by wildlife. They generally are, because they are less dense and human or livestock or any of those. Those are then corridors. Generally, so around the Umkomazi ecosystem, the western border is now the Pare Mountains, and those Pare Mountains have these gaps through them. And there are not many gaps through the Pare Mountains. There's one that goes north to Lake Chipe, and that connects into Tsavo again. And there is the connection south of Moshi that connects to Tarangire National Park. So there's a very distinctive corridor there. That corridor is getting thin and farmed in a lot and quite populated. So it's getting harder for elephants to move through there. Then the corridor south of that is the Lembeni corridor that we talk about. Sisal farming, big commercial sisal farms, so there's conflict there, but there is still some easier movement of elephants through there that goes also west towards Tarangire. Then you have the Same corridor that's now not viable anymore. There's a town now right in the middle of that corridor, although one or two elephants, so that's just a conflict zone. Then you have a long stretch of mountain. Then you get the main corridor between the South Pare Mountains and the North Usumbara Mountains, and that goes down to the coast. That corridor is about 50 kilometers wide, and it goes all the way down, across the main road into the Goa swamps, and from there into the Pangani River Basin. Excuse me. So this, because it's such a wide corridor, is now becoming the only real viable corridor. So the traffic there of elephant is a lot more now than I could imagine. It also has mountains on both sides, so there's water and it's cool. So in the dry season, there's a lot of traffic through there, elephant-wise. The issue we have now is that the next safe zone, as we would refer to it, or space available for elephants to not have conflict, is 120 kilometers away from Mkomazi National Park. So that corridor is a huge distance. Now it's getting harder for elephants to get through there because it's a two-week journey for them to get through there now. And a herd of 70 or 100 elephants that just have this seasonal movement cause a lot of kind of damage through the watery areas where people are also now still farming. But with these drones, for the first time now, we've managed methods that we can move these elephants through that corridor now, mainly at night. Because that's when cat livestock are enclosed, people are in their houses, and we can kind of maneuver elephants through there. And we do it, and it's not even work that's possible with a helicopter, because except maybe with a thermal device or something. But
wow.
with two motorbikes and two rangers and a drone, we've managed to now move big herds of 100 elephants um, over a 10-day period, and we were able to move them 120 kilometers
Wow.
from substantial safe zone to substantial safe zone. So,
Amazing.
in order for us to kind of keep this connectivity going.
That's
And then
amazing.
because you're doing it peacefully and safely and no one gets injured, you can then start negotiate kind of with people. For the first time, we can negotiate where can elephants drink, where can we, because we can allow them to drink and then safely for them to move on. It's not
Mm-hmm.
uncontrolled drinking, but
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
it's a lot easier to work with an elephant that's not thirsty than it is with one that's thirsty. He's kind of far more forgiving in his behavior.
Yeah.
But
No, that's amazing. The technology is amazing. I think the
yeah,
coolest part about these videos that I've noticed in the last couple of months is obviously it's thermal drones, and so you pick up different signatures on these elephants. And there's been elephants that have like one hot ear, one cold ear. The coolest one. So tell me, number one, I want to hear about those kinds of things. But the other thing that I noticed was that their feet. So
mm,
obviously they were standing in water that cooled their feet, and then they started walking, and you could literally see
mm,
their footprints. Well, number one, you could see the socks right
yeah,
on their feet,
yeah.
but
But you
then you
can
could
see where they
see
step. That
where they've
transfer.
stepped.
Yeah, and the step kind of disappears as it returns to normal. But yeah, so that got us to what is now the Kazia Tembo. Kazia Tembo in Swahili is just elephant work, So
Okay, okay.
my staff started asking me, "Where are you going?" And it's like, Kazia Tembo, elephants are calling. So that's where, so it's not like that's where the name came from, and it's Swahili, so it's never been intended to be um, anything else than I'm going to work, So that's where that started, and it's been hugely effective, and everyone has asked. So there's always been skepticism, and there are always people that will say no, things will never work, So there are two types of people, some people that give something a go, and some people that will always say no, it will never work, So we are unfortunately the type of the half full type of glass people, and we gave it a go, and we had hugely positive results. But some of the comments we had early on were Tanzanians will never be able to fly drones. It's going to get crashed. And unbelievable that we still have those type of comments from extraordinary.
Listen, those types of comments should be directed at people like me. Like I
Yeah,
will
I
crash
know.
a drone
If you're 50, I
in
can
a
understand.
moment.
Yeah, I know, but just the assumptions that people from a certain area won't be able to fly drones. It's just kind of so limiting and thoughts. That in the contrary, we have incredibly skilled pilots. Pilots that are unbelievable. That far better than myself or pro pilots that have come from the outside. So it's just. Tanzanians, and you can see it in every Tanzanian's life. There's a complete commitment to something, whether it's welding gates or whether it's transporting rice, or it's one of the best qualities that I've seen from Tanzanian people is that it's always all in, and that type of character or quality is extremely helpful when it comes to kind of the finer type of skills that you need to acquire to be successful. So we have pilots, and most of pilots that we train, just take it so seriously that this is my CV, I'm a pilot, this is my flight record, this is my log, this is and it's just unbelievable how good these ranges now are. And it's not, I'm not selecting generally people that are going to get trained. I get sent. We have obviously a memorandum of understanding and a public-private partnership relationship with the Tanzanian government, where we work closely with the Parks Board and authorities, but we also get human resources from TANAPA, that's what makes this model work. It's not a NGO model where we are away from government and we're looking for money.
So
No,
these guys, these drone operators, are TANAPA employees.
yes. And we
Amazing.
want them to fly the drones because there's sensitive information. I prefer to have
Yeah.
rangers doing the job, and I don't have to pay those salaries. So it's very much, um, a win-win for everyone. Rangers now are empowered, where rangers will not be able to integrate into society to go and play football with the community because they always were just seen as people that would come and arrest me. The rangers that are now in our Kazia Tembo projects are heroes in the community.
Mm.
They play football every afternoon. Well, now we have time. Even the community now has time for football because normally that was occupied by making fires
Chasing elephants.
and getting ready for. So it just makes such a massive difference if you have the right model in an area with the right human putting it in. We just have hardware. We provide hardware and training and making sure that logistics are in place.
So,
Of
how many
course,
drones do you have out right now, Carl?
yes, we always have too few. So you know how it goes that if you are successful, and we have a 5-year plan for Umkomazi. What was a 5-year plan always gets pulled quicker than we have to. So we wanted to have one corridor each year. We wanted to add something, but the moment you're successful in the first corridor, people start phoning from further away. So
Yeah, because you're doing some work in Ngorongoro right now.
yeah, so we have I think about 8, 10 drones flying
Okay.
on a daily basis, of which is now in 3 different areas. In Ngorongoro,
Okay.
we're added with Karatu that has a very hard um, conservation kind of farm border. So that area operation is constant, continuous work every night. Elephants exit Ngorongoro into farmland, even in the dry
Mm-hmm.
season, even if there are
Mm-hmm.
no crops on the field. So and then obviously Mkomazi, which is a huge area. I think eventually that will be 400 kilometers of straight line corridor boundaries that we need to work in. Endumet is another at least 120 kilometers of southern Endumet, and then the Sinya western border, where at least we have a hunting block to absorb something, and then on the eastern border close to Kilimanjaro. And then we have the whole Ngorongoro southern border where there are huge commercial farming. So under our management, I would say it's probably now close to 500 kilometers that we're covering
Wow.
with 8 drones or so,
Wow.
and
That's so
five,
cool.
six, 5, 6 mobile units, so very effective, but it takes planning, dedication, and a complete commitment. And I think the government has realized that you can't have rangers that kind of have their normal duties, and then if someone phones, they then need to react. It really became a realization that it's almost a full-time job, and if you're not going to dedicate resources to it, you're not going to win the battle. And luckily now that we have methods that, one, gives us the ability to work at night, first of all, safely. Secondly, you can work in any conditions, rain or shine. It's no point in you telling the farmer, I can't work tonight because it's raining. And then the third point is that you can move elephants a substantial distance. It doesn't help you clap and they shift to your neighbor, and the same elephant then just does damage all along the line, and actually does uh, damage on 5 farms, instead of one. So the ability to move that elephant really is substantial. But if it's 10 kilometers, we can move him 10 kilometers. It doesn't matter. You just add a battery. Um,
Mm.
so the combination of all those aspects is what makes the method successful. One, it's with government. Human resources are with our government rangers. Yes, our own pilots also. Hardware is in our control, because my meeting with the parks authorities is the moment I give you the drone, it's going. Some politician is going to phone you, and then your drone is gone. And then the warden will say, yes, you're right. And I go like, so for us to be operational, I will keep the hardware with me, and then you send your human resources to our mobile camps, and that model works because it needs to be consistent. If you're not consistent, then you might as well not even start.
Yeah.
So those are the realizations, and the model is now so refined that it becomes easy to scale it from here. That's
No,
why
amazing.
we can work now in Ngorongoro, because we've done the 2 years of hard yards. We've proved that we can just work in a straight line, and really then be effective, because you only really realize how effective you are if you have um, eyes all across the conflict zone. Otherwise, you just increase conflict
Somewhere else.
in your
Somewhere
neighboring
else. Yeah,
areas.
yeah, yeah.
And then what's the point of that? It's
Yeah.
almost borderline unfair that farmer now has double the elephants and this farmer has none.
Yeah.
Mm.
No, dude, like
Yeah.
again, the reason I reached out to you is it's almost like the thing that I look forward to watching on LinkedIn every morning. Like I open it up and I was like, let me see what video Carl has submitted. It's really, really cool. I think you're doing amazing work.
Thank
We have a lot of people that listen to this podcast that I've had a couple of times. People are like, how can I help?
you. Yeah.
So how can people help, Carl? I assume you're always looking for drones,
Yeah.
always looking for support. How does that work?
Yeah, absolutely. So we just to reiterate, we are not an NGO, and I don't think we ever would want to be one. We are very much an implementing partner, and we work on a public-private partnership with the Tanzanian
Okay.
government, and of course, we use our tourism side of our business to fund a lot of what we do. So
Yep.
I never wanted to um, compete for other people's money or go into the donor kind of funding world, because it's not, we've started this to save a friend's life, and it's worked, and now we're continuing. But obviously, that's our funding model is based on our own safari company. My poor wife just has to look at how we finance it. But we bring in the private sector, so commercial farmers that has direct benefit, and then obviously at Ngorongoro it was fairly easy to finance our first drones there, because the private sector just stepped in. The lodge is right on the boundary, but we have problems funding Enumet, for example, which is there's not so much commercial interest there. With regards to lodges and so forth, and it's also a kind of an area that has had lots of failures. So people don't believe that things will work. So it's harder for us to get drones there. And then in Mkomazi, it's just so large that I don't think we will ever have enough resources to
Okay.
manage everything. So for us, before we move into an area, we want to be fully equipped with regards to transport, mobility, and drones, so that we don't have loss of hardware. So we understand what it takes to keep operational effectivity, and we don't want to do high risk things just for the sake of taking on a new area. So for Endomet, in the next 2 years, we need to deploy 5 mobile units there, of which each unit needs 2 drones, for example. And then slowly, the quicker we get the drones, the more we can kind of cover the whole area.
And a mobile unit is comprised of, did you say
It's just a
motorbikes
trailer.
as well?
Yeah, it's a trailer with solar power. So power is obviously a main component in drone work, is constantly charging batteries. So we have beefed up solar systems in these trailers, and then it provides a bit of comfort for rangers. So if you've worked the whole night, I don't want a ranger to come back and cook his own meal, So I have a cook there for him, that he gets his meals. I don't want him to kind of do other work, and I give each of these mobile camps internet, for example, so that the guy can get in contact with his family, he can watch football, or whatever, watch a movie. So this is for us a minimum requirement, and I think that's why, from a human resources point of view, we've been successful, because we understand, me working with these rangers most nights alongside them, I understand how tired you are after a month of flying, and I think that's why the model works. Is we look after our not even our staff, but we look after rangers that work in this spectrum. We understand that it's dangerous work, and we want to provide them with a minimum kind of standard, and we also want to provide them with the right equipment to be able. I can't expect you to do the job if you need to do it with your own eyesight, with your small little ears, and work at night. We are just not equipped to do it. So without this layer of protection and thermal capability to, one, keep our staff safe, and then two, having the ability to move elephants a substantial distance in any weather conditions is for us a minimum. Otherwise, what are we doing? So we are constantly battling with drones. So yes, anything really, anything helps.
Gotcha.
But we have a
Gotcha.
whole list of stuff. People can get involved on any level. It's almost like what we call that. Sometimes you get these guys getting married, and then they send you this.
Yeah, wedding register.
So it doesn't matter if you can only do the cutting board. It's okay. We still need the cutting board. We and if we're bringing scent-based measures. And now one of the biggest issues with drone uses is big trees, for example, has a limitation then on how
Yeah, of
close.
course. Yeah.
Now we have speakers and spotlights, and we increased delivery distance of drone noise and things like that. All works, but we also work with scent-based measures. So now each camp has a little paintball gun. I don't know if you know this game that the
Yeah,
kids,
yeah.
they shoot each other. But now you get little balls of tear gas, or
Wow.
yeah, you get, for self-defense. These things are used for
Yeah.
self-defense in South Africa. So for us to get that elephant from under the trees, we just pop 100 meters away, two of those little balls in there, and then very quickly you get the elephants out from under the trees, and then the drone takes over from them, and it keeps them moving and things like that.
Amazing.
So every day we have ways to minimize risk and to keep drones flying for longer, and to make pilots more successful. So it's actually quite interesting, the work that we do. So out of Ngorongoro Forest, for example, now you have these very clearly defined elephant paths, because obviously an elephant needs to fit through. And you can see where the elephants come out. And now with all our data, we know exactly where they walk. So if I want that elephant to turn at this junction, we go at night now, and we just spray 2 lines of kind of pepper spray on this particular junction where we don't want him to turn into. And then slowly, subconsciously, we are working with these elephants on a scent-based measure, just to minimize the amount of elephants that come out. So now, instead of having to deal with 30, again, we're now just having to deal with 10. So it gets very interesting. We are starting to work with what frequencies of propeller pitch, what noises are more effective than other noises. Some elephants understand Swahili, for example, the ones that are more outside, so they are so used to farmers shouting at them, toka, 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 go, 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 that if you deliver that over a speaker, it has a far better effect than perhaps any other noise.
Wow.
So it becomes really interesting, and then it also, our rate of failure. So with the most stubborn bulls, so if you go through that LinkedIn profile and you look at the Ngorongoro 3 months that we've flown there now, we bumped into a bull that is just extremely stubborn. I haven't seen him, and it became, and I didn't go and step in. I didn't go, and we didn't go and used guns and chased him with helicopter. I told my pilots there, and I said, fine, we'll give you a month. Apply pressure on this elephant for a month, and we see if we can. He needs. It's very
It's a
much.
behavioral change.
He doesn't need to have any reward for his effort. So for him, it becomes a calculation. Every night I walk out, I go to the farm, and I get nothing in return. So that subconscious battle and almost remapping the minds of elephants for us as far better long term. So that same town that we started 2 years ago, Karamba town, that was that war zone. Today, people have forgotten elephants because we just continuously started flying over this area, even if it's surveillance flying. So the constant subconscious battle that we've had there, just in noise and irritation, and no reward for energy spent, no reward for energy spent. We don't have elephants in that area anymore, but the corridor right next to that irrigation zone is the corridor that we want them to be in, and that corridor goes to the lake or the dam that was created, and that's their drinking point that we have now negotiated. So we don't fly over that corridor, and even if we do fly over it, it's at 250 meters just to do observation. So we don't have any subconscious pressure on those
Wow.
elephants. And now we're almost remapping the minds of elephants of, the primary
And so that
drivers.
bull in Ngorongoro, has he changed his mind?
He has, literally 3 or 4 days ago. So he's been gone for 4 days. So let's see, you know. But now
Amazing.
the bigger question is where did he go? Um, so now we are waiting for the neighbor to phone and going like,
Yeah.
hey, I have this really stubborn elephant, you know. But that just explains um, the importance of having no gaps in your
Yeah, yeah.
line and just having active management of these animals. It's gonna never stop, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
It gets less, and you kind of and then you have to look at what are the other options, and those are fences, and those are electrified fences, you know. And then we get back to that we're losing the connectivity that you spoke about earlier, you know. And then we're going to sit with subspecies of elephants, you know, and we're going to and then back to the larger um, kind of purpose. What are we doing, you know? Why are we doing all of these things? And it's literally, you know, to have the connectivity, but also to secure someone's harvest, and to
Hmm.
be able to do
Hmm.
it consistently and to be able to do it safely, and in any weather conditions. And if you consider the 2 years, there's a lot of money in elephant conservation, you know. And we stepped into this world with nothing, and if you look at the areas that we've been now given to work in, it's almost incredible, you know, that Amboseli Endumet ecosystem, you know, Tsavo, Mkumazi, you know, Ngorongoro,
Yeah,
uh,
it's the hotspots of elephants
yeah, you
in
know,
Tanzania, if not in Africa.
but it's also high-profile areas, you know, where
Yeah, that's what I meant. That's what I meant.
you would have imagined that someone would have sorted it out already, you know, if you consider how many NGOs there are already working there. Um, and then I don't want to say anything really, but when we go out at night, there's nobody else. There's no one coming in, and this was almost the sobering, big realization. I think in my subconscious mind, I expected everyone to be there, you know.
Lots of NGOs. Yeah.
And in reality, there's no one, and there's a whole lot of static passive measures, you know, that are obviously not effective. Otherwise, I wouldn't have had to go in the first place, you know. And we just realized the scale of the problem, and if we fail, what the consequences would be, you know, and not just on a food security point of view, but also on a larger habitat
Yeah. Yeah.
and connectivity point of view, you know. So yeah, man, without talking too much about these things, you know, it's just humbling, first of all. And then if you're looking at the scale of the problems, you know, we this 500 kilometers that we're covering is still a drop in the bucket, you know.
Sure.
If you look at the conflict map of Tanzania, it's every block, you know, of the country as human elephant conflict, and we are working in three dots, you know. If you
Yeah.
look,
Yeah. Well, you're doing great work, Carl, and that's why I wanted to have you on. I wanted to have a conversation.
yeah,
Please know that this window, this door is always open.
yeah. Thanks, man.
I'm a
It was
big fan of
absolute.
your work.
Thank you, man. And it brings us back to a little bit your bigger story and what you are trying to achieve, you know. And it's just the realities of the problems we face, you know. And
The realities of the problem. Exactly.
it doesn't have to be sugar coated, and it doesn't have to be made something it's not, you know. And uh, we also don't have to be ashamed of our past, you know. So if hunting or that habitat conservation model, if we inherited it um, because it was the only method that was viable, you know, 100 years ago, why are we now so what is the right
Against it.
word? So uh, ungrateful, I want to say. Why
Yeah,
are we now
yeah.
so um, we have to say thank you for hunters sitting in areas that no one else ever wanted to go. You know, we should be grateful for hunters protecting buffer zones and doing the work I'm doing now used to be done by hunting and hunters. You know, it's always sorting out problem. You know, hunting, the original form of hunting is like, here's a leopard eating my livestock. Who has a gun? This is how it started. Not, I'm a hunter, I want a leopard on my wall. No, it was like, and someone went like, you have a gun, you have to go. And then you go like, I'm going to bring a friend, you know, because it's much better to go, you know, and people are like almost push you into the bush, you know.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and then it became this almost job, you know, of whenever there are problem animals between the core area and human habitation, that's where buffer zones existed, and this is where hunting has always taken part, you know, and this is where I'm still now working every day. Now I have to do it without hunting, which is a lot harder. Um, and you know, hunting has looked after this habitat for so long, and no one is saying thank you, you know.
Yeah.
Um, and it's also very natural. So now we're looking at, you know, Tanzania, right? And you know the southern Serengeti, and you know the Maswa areas around the southwestern Serengeti. And we know the Friedkin family that is invested in that hunting block, and we know that they've changed it to photographic. Why? Because it's only now become viable to do so. So it's even a
Because
hunting.
why? Because why?
It
Because
makes more
somebody
money.
has it
Yeah.
makes more money, but somebody has decided over the last 10 years to protect it to get to the point where it's now viable for photographics.
If it was never protected by hunting, that step would never have been possible in the first place. Then it would have been a farm now. Um,
Exactly. Exactly.
so for me, there's very much. I don't understand why people don't understand the
Oh, we've
past.
done a terrible job. We've done a terrible job of explaining this thing that
Yeah,
you've just explained, and that's my job.
yeah, exactly. So the communication and then telling the stories is very much important, but also to just stay with the bigger conversations about habitat and connectivity and all of that is
Mm-hmm.
obviously far more
Mm-hmm.
relevant and natural. And then there's also this, I think there's this um, perception that animals live forever. And I don't get it, man, because it's not the case, man. Look at me. I'm going older. So, it's very, everything dies, you know, at some point. And whatever way you want to kind of wish it away, it just doesn't ever change, you know. So it does, um, and I wish just people would just really kind of take a moment and just think about it. That you know, this elephant that is walking here now today, it doesn't matter what or where or who loves it or whatever. At some point, it's not going to be there anymore. You know, and I think that's why the habitat then becomes much more important than the individual animal. You know, and I think if we can separate those two things just from a conversational point of view, we could have far more constructive conversations. You know, so and this
Well
is
said.
coming from someone that are working in these areas every day, and this is coming from someone that also have worked inside national parks, and it also comes from someone that are looking at it at from a scale point of view. You know, if we are looking at this 250,000 square kilometers, and we are considering that it takes, let's say, 30 lodges in the Serengeti, which is 15,000 square kilometers, 15 lodges to look after that kind of prime photographic area. How many lodges is it going to take to look after the next 250,000 square kilometers of tsetse fly? So then you do a few maths, and you look at, like, let's say we pull the plug on hunting today. We still need to find 2,000 lodge owners, you know, that's going to occupy the space. Then all of them need to bring their $2 million, you know. So we're not going to find those type of and all in kind of areas that need to compete with the Serengeti and the Masai Mara and those kind of prime areas, you know. So, you
Yeah.
know, what
Yeah.
other options do we have?
Yeah. Well said. Well said.
So,
All right, Carl, I'm going to let you get back to fighting elephants.
thanks, man. Robbie, I
Thank you so
appreciate it.
much for everything that you've done. And please don't hesitate to reach out. You know how to get a hold of me now.
Yeah, we'll give an update, especially on the newer areas. We would love to just let your listeners know how it's going there. And yeah, please let us know if there's a drone or something, or even
Sure.
that would really be helpful. We have already private sector guys and families, and the Tom Smulders Family Trust, from Holland is flying a drone with us, so there's very much. We send those families and individuals regular updates, and we keep them in the loop in
Amazing.
our efforts, and they can see what their drones are doing, so very much we open and transparent with what we do.
Thanks, Carl. Appreciate you.
Thanks, Robbie. Have a good one.
All right.